Japan's next mainline set for the Scarlet and Violet era has officially been announced, named Crimson Haze. And during the Fukuoka Championship League, the Pokemon Company revealed the first couple of cards that will be coming in said set. So in today's video, we'll be taking a look at what was shown. There were only a handful of cards, but that's not to say they all aren't worth talking about, except the A-Spec cards, since I want to make a separate video for that once all the new ones have been revealed. First up is the cover card for the set, Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, a 260 HP colorless type Pokemon with only a single attack. For a whopping 5 colorless energy, it does 240 damage, and then this Pokemon can't attack during the next turn. Now you may be thinking, this is far too much energy for that amount of damage, considering some Pokemon can do more damage for less. Well, Ursaluna has an ability to help relieve this high cost. The effect reads, this Pokemon's Blood Moon attack costs 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has already taken. This card is pretty much identical to Radiant Charizard. However, Ursaluna has a few noticeable benefits over Radiant Charizard. The first one being the attack cost. Both Pokemon's attacks cost the same amount of energy, but with Charizard you need to attach at least 1 fire energy, whereas Ursaluna requires only colourless energy, so any energy type, making Ursaluna a lot more splashable when it comes to deck building. The second benefit being the fact it's an EX. As with Radiant cards, you can only play 1 Radiant card in your deck. So if you're playing Radiant Greninja, you can't play Radiant Charizard, just like how we'll be limited to 1 A-Spec per deck. However, the card also has a few downsides when compared to Radiant Charizard. The notable one being, a point I just talked about, it's an EX. So if your opponent knocks it out, they get 2 prize cards, whereas with Charizard, they would only receive 1. But Ursaluna does have a huge 260 HP on a basic Pokemon, considering most V-Star Pokemon have 280 HP. Both Ursaluna and Charizard have their benefits and caveats, being strong and weak in different aspects. I could see Ursaluna being splashed into a couple of decks due to its comeback potential. Granted, your opponent has to have taken at least 4 prize cards to make the attack cost 1 energy, unless you use a double turbo energy, which will have the downside of lowering your damage, but your opponent will have only need to have taken 3 prize cards instead. The ability to hit a huge 240 damage for 1 energy is really good, and enough to knock out basic Pokemon EX and some basic Pokemon V. The only issue being you now have a 2 prize Pokemon in the active ready for your opponent to knock out next turn. The card has potential, but it is a very high risk, high reward move if you decide to pull it off. Next up is Screamtail EX, a 190 HP ancient psychic type Pokemon, which has 2 attacks. The second attack requires 1 psychic and 2 colorless, doing 120 damage, which is very low, but it has the added effect of discarding an energy card from your opponent's Pokemon. Sadly, I think the time and effort it takes to set this up is not worth the payoff. Low damage, and while the secondary effect is good, because you can even discard special energy with it, decks are playing a lot of ways to recycle energy, so getting that lost energy back into play is very easy. And with such low HP, Screamtail EX is very easy to knock out. But what does the first attack do? For a single colourless energy, you can use this attack only if you go second, and only during your first turn. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any supporter cards from their hand. This effect is actually really powerful since supporter cards are very important and in some instances the key piece for certain decks in order to get their board set up. However, that's only if you go second and establish the card onto the board. So if you don't find a Nest Ball or an Ultra Ball, or you don't draw into it, you can't use the attack ever, and instead can only use the second attack. Maybe in a stall or stun strategy it could find its home, and possibly in something like Gardevoir. The third and final EX that was revealed was Iron Thorns EX, a 230 HP future electric type Pokemon with an attack and an ability. For 1 lightning and 2 colourless, it does 140 damage and an additional effect that requires you to move an energy onto one of your benched Pokemon. Future Box is a deck that's seen play over in Japan, utilising a lot of different future Pokemon, and this could be a new addition. The deck was already using lightning energy to fuel Iron Hands EX anyway. The only downside is that the attack requires you to move an energy. it's not optional, but the card's ability more than makes up for that. While this Pokemon is in the active spot, Pokemon with a rule box in play, except future Pokemon, don't have an ability. Oh boy, here we go again. But in all seriousness, this effect is probably the best ability lock Pokemon we have, if you're playing a future deck, because in any other deck, it's a detriment just like the other two we currently have. Plus its damage may seem low, but Future Box also plays Iron Crown EX to boost damage, and since it's a future Pokemon, its ability will still be live while this card is in the active spot. This card isn't bad and could potentially see play in future decks as a good stun option, plus it can move an energy off of itself and onto another Pokemon for future turns. But it is an EX Pokemon, so it could be an easy 2-prize knockout for your opponent. Definitely a card worth considering if you plan on playing Future Box or any kind of future deck. Applin, Diplin and Fione aren't really worth talking about. Fione can get you a supporter from the discard, but we have better options for recycling supporters with cards such as Palpad. Its other attack for 1 water could be useful, letting you do 20 damage times the number of energy on your opponent's Pokemon, but the most damage you'll get is 60, maybe 80, depending on what deck you're up against. Moving on to the item and supporter cards. Community Center and its accompanying supporter card Caretaker are just there. They're okay, nothing amazing. However, Enhanced Hammer, a card that hasn't had a reprint since Guardians Rising during the Sun and Moon era back in 2017. And this card is very powerful. Its effect is very similar to Crushing Hammer, but with a few differences. You don't need to flip a coin, but it can only remove special energy, which isn't even a downside considering that there are quite a few decks that play special energy cards. Arceus and Great Tusk make use of double turbo energy, Lugia uses multiple different types of special energies, Mew also uses... The card is very strong, and when played in the right deck, primarily control or stun type decks such as Great Tusk, it can be very strong, especially considering you can only play 4 copies of special energy cards. And as far as I know, there aren't any ways of recovering them from the discard, so once they're gone, they are gone. A card that against the right deck could be devastating, but only time will tell if we receive more types of special energy in the future, like we saw in the Sword and Shield era. Then the card will be a staple. Lucky Helmet is another card making its return from the X and Y era, released all the way back in Ancient Origins. A tool card that says, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, draw 2 cards. A very niche effect, but could be useful for, again, a stall or stun strategy, allowing you to dig deeper into your deck. The card did see play, but only in a single deck, being Gyarados, with its ancient trait, allowing you to attach up to 2 tool cards to it. We do have a similar card in the format, being Reveroom EX, which, because of its ability, means you can attach 4 tool cards to it. So 4 Lucky Helmets means you draw 8 cards. The only problem being is that this card literally sees no play at all. When the right deck comes around, it could find its uses, but until then, it's just okay. And our final card from the reveal is the supporter card, Perrin, which reads, reveal up to 2 Pokemon from your hand and shuffle them into the deck. Then search your deck for up to that many Pokemon, reveal them and put them into your hand. Not gonna lie, genuinely a really good card. Its effect is almost identical to an item card which we haven't seen since the end of the Sun and Moon era, that being Pokemon Communication. The big difference being Perrin is a support card, but you can reveal up to 2 Pokemon instead of just 1. This card is a great consistency boost with ensuring you can see the Pokemon that you need in order to get your board established. Say you've drawn some Pokemon that you don't really need, or your bench is full and you have basics clogging up your hand and you need some evolution Pokemon. You can play Perrin and exchange those Pokemon for any other Pokemon you need. The only big downside of this card is that it will use your supporter for the turn, but for some decks, that might not be a bad thing, especially in the early game or maybe even late game, if your board is already established, but you just need that one Pokemon or evolution to finish it off. A very good card that has the potential to see a lot of play. Crimson Haze is already starting off strong, and this is just the beginning. The set doesn't release in Japan until March 22nd, so we still have plenty more cards that have yet to be revealed from this set, and its accompanying set Mask of Change, both of which will probably make up our next main set after the release of Temporal Forces. We've only received a taste of what's to come, but things are definitely looking interesting for the Pokemon trading card game.